اوكي. اذا زي ما قلنا، نعيدها شوي هيك. زي ما قلنا في عندنا hypothalamus وفي عندنا pituitary gland. For the anterior pituitary gland, regulation is as follows. في عندنا blood coming from the body, samples of the situation, what happens in the body or what's happening in the body. في عندنا hypothalamic cells or neuronal cells. في عندنا cell body and then axons and then synapses. Those synthesize hormones or hormone-like agents, transport them axonally, and then store them in the synapses. And then, according to the levels of neurotransmitters, hormones in the blood, the synapses will, presynapses will respond by secretion of hormonal agents. Those hormonal agents will travel in this local circulation, hypophyseal portal vein, to the anterior pituitary, where there are some specialized cells, many specialized cells, that would respond to those hormonal agents. Okay? في عندنا many hormonal agents or types of cells that release different hormones in that area. Okay? Now, in the posterior pituitary, the situation is different. في عندنا long neuronal cells with their cell bodies located in the hypothalamus. Axons are long, and the synapses, they are located at the posterior pituitary. And in fact, samples of the blood that come to the posterior pituitary will create a response in the synapses that will release hormonal agents directly into the body. So يعني posterior pituitary is like, you could say, one step, and the anterior pituitary, there are two steps of release of hormonal agents. هلا there are some different hormonal agents that are released from anterior and posterior pituitary. We'll talk about them now. Posterior pituitary, in fact, releases two components. One is called oxytocin, and the other one is antidiuretic hormone. Okay? While the anterior pituitary can release many components. في عندنا growth hormone, في عندنا gonadal hormones like follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. في عندنا prolactin. شو كمان في عندنا؟ adrenocorticotropin, ACTH. Okay? So those, in summary, like the components that are released from there. Now, anterior pituitary hormones, you could say that they are divided into categories depending on the type of receptor and type of ligands. So ligand is a substance that binds to a receptor. So the first category is growth hormone and prolactin. They share common thing that their type of receptors is called the JAK-STAT receptor system. So what's the JAK-STAT receptor? And they are composed of a single polypeptide chain. So what's the JAK-STAT system? It is a receptor type that is composed of two different subunits of a receptor. And the intracellular domain of the receptor is called a JAK, or Janus activated kinase. In fact, Janus is a mythological god, or Greek god, with two faces. One face, one face is looking to the right and one face is looking to the left. So one face is looking to the past and one face is looking to the future. So this is, in fact, the name came to mimic what's going on with the receptor. So the receptor is composed of two JAK units that are found intracellularly. When the substrate or ligand binds to the receptor, it recruits a second subunit in a way that two JAKs will be adjacent to each other, like the Greek god, Janus. That's why they are called Janus activated kinases. في حد عنده سؤال؟ شكله حد بيسوق ولا شيء. المفروض في هون lock mute all. Whatever. طيب هلا زي ما قلنا اذا the two JAK units became adjacent to each other like the mythological or Greek god اللي هو Janus. And then each Janus or activated kinase or JAK activates the other subunit by phosphorylation. قلنا في عندنا ways to activate molecules in the body. One famous mechanism is to attach a phospho group to it, which is called phosphorylation. Removal of a phospho group most likely results in deactivation of protein. طبعا there are some exceptions. So, and this is mediated by an enzyme called phosphatase. Okay, so the JAK, when it is fully active by phosphorylation from the other subunit, it activates a STAT. A STAT is called a signal transduction and activator of transcription. So this STAT will be phosphorylated. It will dimerize in this way, and then it will translocate to the nucleus, where it acts as the name implies, signal transduction, transducer, and activator of transcription. So it's a transcription inducer. Binds to some elements in the DNA and starts transcription of components. Okay? يعني في عندنا many ways to regulate functions of hormones or intracellular agents. The most common is, or popular, is to induce DNA to synthesize new components, اللي هو transcription of proteins. Now, this system is inhibited by silencer of cytokine signaling, or SOX. So, as the name implies, هدول receptors بتاعت الجاكستات, they are common receptors for components called cytokines. Cytokines, يعني they are في overlap بالdefinition of cytokines and hormones, but most likely hormones, they act on long distances. يعني بنتقلوا من brain بيأثروا على the entire body, بيأثروا على liver to produce some components. While cytokines, their effect is يعني مثلا نحكي short distance, يعني زي صواريخ مدى قليل. Okay. هلا now in the body in the body طبعا كل receptor له different JAKs, and each JAK has a different stat. So like for example JAK 1 and 3 زي ما قلنا انه receptors are hetero or oligo or hetero receptors, يعني they are not the same. يعني one subunit of the receptor is different from the second subunit of the receptor. Okay, and the variability in those mediates different effects. Different cytokines bind to different heterodimers of receptors, and the different JAKs activate different stats, and this results in different cellular functions. In fact, JAK stat system plays a role in immunity, inflammatory bowel diseases, cancer. في عندنا many conditions that are related to the JAK stat system or treated with JAK inhibitors. يعني مثلا في عندنا a JAK inhibitor tufasitinib is used for management of rheumatoid arthritis. إذا متذكرين في مرضى الكوفيد, because of something called cytokine release syndrome, which is a component of the disease, كانوا يستخدموا دواء اسمه tocilizumab. Okay, so this is a JAK inhibitor or interleukin 6 inhibitor, or in general, interleukin is a cytokine. So the other type of families or receptors is the TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone family of receptors, which is in common between also follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. زي ما قلنا TSH is another name for thyrotropin. Okay, thyrotropin is a component that is released from the زي ما قلنا anterior pituitary and affects the thyroid. And TSH comes as a response from TRH, which is thyrotropin releasing hormone. This comes from the hypothalamus. So those have a group of families of receptors. أكيد درستوها أنتوا يعني. It is called the G protein coupled receptors. G protein coupled receptors, they are known for that name because they are coupled to G proteins. And usually, those proteins, TSH, FSH, or LH, they are composed of two subunits. Okay, a common alpha subunit, but a different beta subunit, which mediates different functions. That's why TSH has a different function than LH, and it has a different function compared to FSH. And this is also why FSH, which is a sex hormone, has a different function compared to LH, because they have a different gamma beta subunit. Now, the system is composed, زي ما قلنا, of a receptor. It's called a G protein coupled receptor. And it is known that it is a 7 transmembrane receptor. يعني شو معناها؟ Usually this is not the drawing اللي بتشوفها بالtext box, but you can see إنه صورة الريسبتور بتكون like that. 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. This is the ligand binding domain, and this is the G protein binding domain. So it is an intracellular domain. Okay, so the receptor, طبعا ليه أنا قلت لكم إنه definitely you study that, because beta receptors and alpha receptors, they are G protein coupled receptors. يعني this is يعني درستوه بفارما 1 I think. So the G protein coupled receptors, they are coupled with G proteins. في عندنا many types of G proteins. في عندنا G proteins called G alpha or GS and GI and GQ and G1213. Each one has different function. So the G proteins are composed of 3 subunits. Alpha, which is different in each of the receptors. It could be alpha S, alpha I, alpha Q, alpha 1, 2, 3. And the second subunits are beta gamma, which are linked to each other. When a substrate like thyrotropin releasing hormone binds to the ligand binding domain, this conveys membrane conformational changes, which activates G proteins to replace their GDP, اللي هو guanosine diphosphate, which is found in an inactive receptor. This is replaced by GTP, which is the triphosphate, which is the active. Now, this activates the function of the alpha, which separates from the beta and gamma, and the beta gamma mediates certain things, and the alpha mediates some other things. Now, alpha S stimulates an enzyme called adenylyl cyclase. Adenylyl cyclase converts ATP to cyclic AMP, while alpha I inhibits the function of adenylyl cyclase. Okay, so this either increases cyclic AMP, and cyclic AMP has certain substrates in the cell intracellularly. Those would change, and then effects could happen. يلا تفضل حابة تاخذي معك روحي معك. هلا alpha Q activates a component called حد يطلع معها كمان. Alpha Q activates something called phospholipase. A phospholipase, from the name, it's a phospholipid breaking agent. It breaks phospholipids. And phospholipids are components of the cell membrane, but they are heterogeneous. يعني في عندنا many components, phospholipids in the body, and then when they break, phospholipids produce some agents. يعني مثلا في عندنا phospholipase C beta, it breaks something called phosphatidyl inositol 4,5 diphosphate into diacylglycerol and inositol triphosphate, or inositol 1,4,5 triphosphate. Now, each of those, they have a certain function, okay? And most likely those play a role in calcium intracellular levels. في عندنا IP3 receptor موجود على the storage sites of calcium in the body or inside the cell, which is the sarcoplasmic reticulum or the endoplasmic reticulum. And diacylglycerol, it has functions like activation of protein kinases. Like protein kinase is an enzyme that phosphorylates proteins. So protein kinase means phosphorylates proteins. Kinase, phosphorylations of protein. Phosphatase, removal of phosphate from proteins. While the alpha 1213, it activates a group of family called the Rome family of components. And this also exchanges the GTP, activates ROGF, which is Rho GTP exchange factor, which exchanges it for the GTDP. It exchanges the GDP with GTP, which leads to activation. زي ما قلنا, this happens to the G protein in the first step of the signaling event. Now the ACTH, or adrenocorticotropic hormone, it is, as the name implies, is a hormone that affects the adrenocortical part of the body. So the adrenal gland is composed of two subunits or two areas. في adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. Usually the adrenal medulla, as you know, it is part of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. It responds to signaling that leads to norepinephrine and epinephrine release in the body. While the cortex is responsible for secretion of three hormonal agents. في عندنا glucocorticoids, اكيد انتم بتعرفوها انه هو دهون الكورتيزون اللي بيستخدم للانفلاميشن او حبوب الكورتيزون اللي ممكن تستخدم للازمه. وفي mineralocorticoids, هذول those are components that are released in response to fluids or electrolytes levels in the body, زي aldosterone إذا مر عليكم. And we have also sex hormones اللي هم estrogen and progestin and also testosterone. They could be released from the adrenal cortex, in fact. راح نحكي عنهم هذول كمان مرة. Now ACTH originally it comes from a precursor that is a precursor for other types of hormones. في عندنا شيء اسمه pro-opiomelanocortin. So from the name, pro, a precursor protein. Opio controls the production of something called opioids or natural opioids, which are endorphins and enkephalins. Those are the natural opioids in our body. أكيد مروا عليكم. And melano, which is melanocyte stimulating hormone, اللي هو MSH. زي ما قلنا الأوبيويدز اللي هم beta enkephalins or beta endorphins. Okay, and the cortin is related to the adrenal cortex stimulation, which is, so this breaks down to endorphins, enkephalins, MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, and also ACTH. And ACTH travels in the circulation to bind to its receptor, which is the ACTH receptor or melanocortin 2 subtype of receptor. When it binds to the receptor, it activates something called melanocortin 2 receptor accessory proteins. Now, the signaling of ACTH is very complex. So it begins with ACTH binding to the receptor, and then the modulator protein affects secondary messenger. It could activate G proteins, or it could affect other signaling events in the cell, or it could open channels, or it could also affect so many other components like ECM, or the extracellular matrix, or integrins. Those are receptors that bind and attach to the extracellular matrix. And as they bind to the extracellular matrix, this affects the cell inside. This is called outside-in signaling. maybe it's a little bit complex for you, so يعني I will skip it for now. But the ECM, the nature of the ECM and the response to the ECM is one of the components of the ability of cancer cells to invade tissue. So their interaction with the ECM or the extracellular matrix, or like let's say this is a cancer cell, it is surrounded by an extracellular matrix that is outside the cell, and the interaction with that ECM would lead to division of the cells, okay, and the release of components called MMPs or matrix metalloproteinases, destruction of the ECM, and their ability to invade and reach a blood vessel where they will metastasize. يعني خلايا السرطان بيتفاعلوا مع الاي سي ام، بيكسروا، بيهربوا من التشو، بيوصلوا لبلد فيسل، بينتقلوا لتشو ثاني، وهذا اللي بيسموه انتشار السرطان او ميتاستاسيس. طبعا يعني this is يعني
دكتور
اتفضل.
يعني هو هذا الشيء stimulated by the ACTH induced.
لا انا بقول انه الخلايا that are there well probably it could lead to that. يعني بس ما في سرطانات that are linked to the ACTH or the excess of ACTH. يعني أنا بحكي إنه the interaction of ACTH with the extracellular matrix affects the cells in a similar manner. يعني إنه proliferation leads to their proliferation or survival or يعني interaction with extracellular matrix.
ما في direct link، بس إذا كان في cancer existed ممكن يعمل له inducing يعني.
احتمال كبير.
اوكي thank you دكتور.
هلا. طيب so زي ما قلنا انه signaling يعني events that happen are wide or it's very complex. ماشي. هلا زي ما قلنا في عندنا anterior pituitary وفي عندنا شيء اسمه ال posterior pituitary. Now the anterior pituitary زي ما قلنا في لها hormones، في عندنا ال growth hormone، في عندنا الجونادوتروبينز اللي هم ال FSH and LH، وفي عندنا البرولاكتين، اوكي، وفي عندنا شو قلنا كمان احنا الادرينوكورتيكوتروبيك هرمون. طبعا يعني هدول بس يعني المحطوطات في الكتاب او in that diagram. الهايبوثالاموس زي ما قلنا في عندنا components، في عندنا many components، في عندنا regulators of growth hormone، في شيء اسمه growth hormone releasing hormone. For gonadotropin في عندنا gonadotropin releasing hormones. For prolactin it doesn't respond to components من الhypothalamus. It responds to dopamine يعني as a neurotransmitter. Okay. Or prolactin as you know إنه هو هرمون المدر للحليب. So it responds to stimulation of the nipple. يعني إنه so this is يعني nerve stimulation that leads to production and secretion of milk from the breast. Now, طبعا in this flow chart you can see the things that are pharmacologically exploited things. بس في عندنا things that are diagnostically exploited or used, but they are not mentioned in the review book. But in the textbook ممكن تلاقوا هاي الأشياء موجودة. زي ما قلنا الجروث هرمون طبعا it could happen or يكون موجود in excess or يكون في deficiency. The same applies to all of those hormonal agents. If it is in excess, you have to suppress it. If it is deficient, you have to replace it or get it from other sources. أموركم تمام بالنسبة للمكيف؟ أموركم تمام؟ حرارة إيمان عندهم ما شاء الله. شكرا. Okay, and the same applies to the posterior pituitary. Now there are some terms in the textbook that you have to be familiar with. So any person ممكن ولد صغير يكون مولود يكون في عنده excess of growth hormone راح يصير أكبر من الحجم الطبيعي other kids. Okay. طبعا this could lead to many complications in fact, and this is referred to as gigantism أو العملاقة. Now on the other hand it could be deficient. ممكن يسموها dwarfism أو القزمة يعني. هلا if the excess of the growth hormone occurs in excess بعد ما يسكروا الابيفيزيال plates أو البليتس المسؤولات عن نمو العظام، راح يصير في growth لللمس اكثر من الجروث اوف ذا لينث اوف ذا بون. اوكي، فبصير في نمو بس في المفاصل، هاي بيسموه acromegaly. اوكي. Now antidiuretic hormone is a hormone that is released زي ما قلنا من posterior pituitary. Now if there is no good release للانتيدايوريتيك hormone راح يصير في diuresis. Okay, so loss of fluids, and this is called central diabetes insipidus. Sometimes this effect is not due to low levels of antidiuretic hormone. Sometimes it is something related to the response to antidiuretic hormone. So either it's called a drug induced، يعني مثلا في عندنا lithium، if you are familiar with lithium is a mood stabilizer. Sometimes lithium antagonizes the effect of antidiuretic hormone on its receptor اللي هو antidiuretic hormone receptor. So this is called peripheral or nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, and this is called neurogenic central, which is related to a deficiency of antidiuretic hormone. This is called central diabetes insipidus. Now السكري بسموه diabetes mellitus. Okay. Gonadotropins are hormones related to sex hormone اللي هم FSH and LH. Also, growth hormone, when it is released from زي ما قلنا anterior pituitary, it travels to the liver, and in the liver it mediates the release of something called insulin-like growth factor 1, IGF-1. So IGF-1, okay, is a second messenger responsible for the effects of growth hormone. Okay, and prolactinoma is a tumor that, from the name, as the name implies, releases prolactin. Okay, and tocolytic is an agent that describes the contraction of uterine smooth muscles. So tocolytic agents, relaxes uterine smooth muscle. يعني from the name, lytic means breaks down. Okay, so tocolysis is relaxation of uterine smooth muscles. Sometimes they use it إذا كان في واحد عندها contractions and she could مثلا deliver early مثلا بيعطوها tocolytic agents. في عندنا many tocolytic agents. فمثلا oxytocin induces contraction of uterine smooth muscles, and oxytocin antagonists, they could be used to reduce the contractions. في عندنا كمان إذا بتعرفوا salbutamol اللي هو البيتا 2 agonist بيستخدموه التبخيرات. So salbutamol or beta 2 agonism also induces a tocolytic effect. Now we will talk about the growth hormone and its derivatives. So growth hormone, as the name implies, it is required for the normal growth of children. But the function of growth hormone doesn't stop during, يعني after childhood. For adults, normal levels of growth hormone are required to maintain protein and lipids metabolism. If you lose growth hormone during adulthood, this leads to wasting of proteins or lipids in the body, or general wasting condition. يعني مثلا ممكن نشبهها condition بالايدز patients او الكانسر patients اسمها الكاكيكسيا. Okay, so زي بيصير في general wasting for the body, and the patient would need growth hormone to be supplemented from an outside source. Now زي ما قلنا انه when growth hormone is released from the anterior pituitary, it travels through the circulation to reach the liver, which releases IGF-1. And growth hormone has natural or يعني analogs that could be used therapeutically to treat many conditions. في عندنا growth hormone deficiency in children and adults. If you detect that growth hormone is missing, مثلا, you could supplement it. Some genetic disorders like Turner syndrome, Noonan syndrome, or Prader-Willi syndrome, they have a natural defect in growth hormone release. So you have to acquire it from the outside. أكيد you know إنه when your baby is growing, you have to check إنه طوله وزنه for a certain period of time, يمكن لسنتين. You have to look for something called the head circumference. Now, there are some charts that are found in many websites. يعني مثلا I'm showing you يمكن اللي بالبيوت شايفين البراوزر.
Yes, Doctor.
Okay, so this is the website of the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And the CDC, in fact, shows you in this page the growth chart of different genders and different age groups, okay, and shows you the growth chart as percentiles. شو معنى percentiles؟ خلينا أورجيكم إياه. So this chart, as you can see, shows you the growth according to the weight and the age. So this is the age of a child. يعني مش راضي يكتب هنا. شوف إذا ممكن أكتب. Okay, بس the x-axis is the age and the y-axis is the weight. Okay? And here above, you can see the head circumference. Now, your baby is مثلا هاي يمكن لسنتين. عمر البيبي 20 خلينا this is birth to 24 months. Boys wait for length. بس خلينا نشوف age. Wait for age مثلا هاي. So this is the age till 24 months, which is 2 years. So عمر البيبي مثلا نفترض 18 ووزنه كان نحكي 50. Okay, so 18 و50. This means that the weight is somewhere here. So this is above the 75th percentile. شو معنى 75th percentile؟ يعني they collected data, normal growth for children. مجموعة كبيرة منهم ورتبوهم. This is a statistical method اللي هو to get the median. And then أعلى 75%, this is the line for their growth. أعلى 98%, this is their line of growth. أعلى 95. So those are percentiles or رتب مئينية بسموها بالعربي. مر عليكم ولا ما؟ الواحد بتحسس لما يحكي مع ناس درسوا أونلاين معظم حياتهم. Okay. So if the baby طبعا في recommendations to tell you إنه مثلا if a baby is not growing well. Now, if the weight is less than 20th percentile for a baby per age, سواء بالweight, sometimes بالheight 2/3 أو 33% percentile. If the baby is below that percentile curve, معناته this is called failure to thrive أو failure to grow properly. Okay? So failure to thrive هي زي ما قلنا إنه أنتوا عندكم baby دائما بتتابعوا الطول والوزن. أكيد you document that. And you have to review the growth charts. If the baby fails to grow according to the growth charts اللي هي موجودة زي ما شفناها, then this is called or considered failure to thrive. في عندنا many people with different definitions of failure to thrive. مثلا FTT if it was يعني below 3% of percentile of weight. Okay, بس يعني اليوم الصبح يعني شفت إنه less than 20% weight percentile, this is a failure to thrive. So you have to act accordingly. هلا أي patient that requires growth hormone طبعا يعني قلنا إنه في عنا adults also, في عندنا they have to test their growth hormone, and if the growth hormone is deficient, then you have to supplement it, even if the condition is not related to growth hormone deficiency. Like في عندنا condition اسمها idiopathic short stature, which is قصر القامة اللي هو غير معروف السبب. That is not growth hormone deficient. You can try growth hormone supplementation to يعني assess it. في عندنا some patients زي ما قلنا الAIDS cancer patients, they require the growth hormone because of the wasting. And some use it for anti-aging programs, يعني انه يعني انه زي علاج للشيخوخة. But animal studies showed that growth hormone in fact reduces the lifespan of animals, but not يعني انه lengthen their lifespan. Now a bovine or يعني a cow form of growth hormone بيستخدموه مزارعي الابقار عشان يزيد نسبة إنتاج الحليب في الكاوز. And in fact for a while كان يستخدم الجروث هرمون to enhance performance، يعني إنه زي مثلا إنه بخلي قدرة التحمل الرياضي أعلى أو يعني and this is like cheating in sports. So the Olympic Committee have banned أو يعني إنه منعت استخدام الجروث هرمون for يعني performance enhancement. Now, there are some adverse effects to growth hormone. Like, for example, it leads to, in fact, formation of edema in the brain that presses on the structures there. And this is called pseudo-tumor cerebri. So it could lead to يعني مثلا some damage to components in the brain. Or difference in function or change in function in the brain. Also, it could affect the growth of the bone at the epiphyseal plate. So the epiphyseal plate, if you know, اللي هو في عنا المفصل, okay, it's connected to a bone, and then we have a structure here اللي هو بيكون موجود في chondrocytes. Chondrocytes, they release or produce new chondrocytes, and this is responsible for lengthening of that area. And then chondrocytes will convert to osteocytes. هذا طبعا مسؤول عن نمو العظام بشكل أفقي. Okay? So this is called epiphyseal plate. And for some reason, if growth hormones effects are excess or in excess during therapy, not adjusted, this would create an abnormal growth of the epiphyseal plate, which would lead to its breakage. So this is called slipped capital femoral epiphysis, which is mostly caused by abnormality of the epiphyseal plate growth at a weight-bearing joint, اللي هي عظمة الحوض. Okay, so this could slip. Also, إذا كان the growth is in excess, okay, not يعني مثلا يعني not going side by side with the increased weight of the child and the ability of the spinal cord to or spinal column to tolerate اللي هو this increase in weight, هاي طبعا ممكن يؤدي إلى التحدب. في عندنا شيء اسمه scoliosis, okay, which could lead to يعني مثلا bending of the spinal cord or side bending of the طبعا في لهم different names اللي هو scoliosis. Okay, so and also edema and hyperglycemia. طبعا sometimes if you have a growth hormone deficiency, this also could mean that some other hormones are missing, so you have to investigate them. In adults, there are some side effects which are more or less similar to the side effects related to its excess in children, like peripheral edema, pain in the muscles, and pain in the joints. Now, meclosermine is an agent that is used in case of growth hormone failure. So, زي ما قلنا, growth hormone could be supplemented from an external source, but probably IGF-1 is not released properly. So if a trial of growth hormone fails, so they give the IGF-1 analogs, which is called the meclosermine. Now, meclosermine is given parenterally in the form of recombinant human IGF-1, but we have also another drug which is called mecasirmin rinafabate. Now, mecasirmin or growth hormone or IGF-1 or sex hormones like, let's say, estrogen or progestin or يعني, those all hormones, they have carrier proteins which would carry those proteins to the site of action, and then they are released there. Okay, sometimes they are highly lipophilic. That's why they require proteins, carrier proteins. Some of you know the carrier proteins that are common for those components, like albumin or يعني some other يعني albumin is the most common type of carrier protein. Okay, so in mecasirmin rinafabate, in fact, they synthesize the IGF-1 analog, which is mecasirmin, and then they link it to the binding protein of mecasirmin, which is IGF-1 binding protein 3, and they give it as a drug. Okay, هاي يعني زي ممكن نحكي بيزيد الستابيليتي of the drug. Now, side effects of mecasirmin could include hypoglycemia, and this could be prevented by consuming a snack or a light snack at the peak effect of mecasirmin. يعني the peak effect usually happens like 5 to 15 minutes after the administration of mecasirmin. So you are advised to consume a snack at that time. يعني ممكن هاي تشوفوها كمان مرضى السكري. مرضى السكري بيكون في عندهم form of insulin اللي هو mixed insulin, insulin مخلوط. الانسولين الايميديت افكت بتاعه يعني requires you انك تاخذ الوجبه بتاعتك بعد 30 دقيقه من جرعه الانسولين. but بعد 6 ساعات في another form of insulin مخلوط مع الانسولين هذا بيكون البيك افكت موجود. ف you have to consume a snack at that time. Now, growth hormone antagonists زي ما قلنا they are required for management of growth hormone excess سواء بالadults or بالchildren. Now, now the growth hormone analogs or antagonists, they look like the growth hormone, but when they bind to the receptor instead of mediating اللي هو الeffect مثلا, they don't mediate the effect. Okay, so يعني زي ما متذكرين the growth hormone is a cytokine receptor ligand. So أول خطوة زي ما قلنا بالbinding إنه it binds to one subunit of the receptor and then it attracts a second subunit of the receptor. Now مشكلة يعني an antagonist could يعني be resistant to the attraction of a second subunit اللي هو this initiates the signaling events. So this happens in some of the antagonists, in fact. Okay, so for example مثلا نحكي انه في عندنا this is called somatostatin. Somatostatin is a natural inhibitor of growth hormone, but طبعا this is not only released from the hypothalamus or pituitary gland, but it is released also from other sites in the body. And somatostatin is responsible for inhibition of other types of hormones, like it inhibits growth hormone, glucagon, insulin, and also gastrin. Gastrin is responsible for the secretion of HCl in the stomach. في عندنا different fragmentation patterns. في عندنا native somatostatin 28, which is composed of 28 amino acids, or 14. Both of them, they are naturally acting inside the body, but المشكلة فيهم إنه they have a short half-life. So to overcome that, الانالوجز of somatostatin زي octreotide, lanreotide or vapreotide, they have a change of the amino acids at the cleavage site. يعني إنه naturally somatostatin is cleaved at a certain region. يعني it requires 2 amino acids to be at those sites. So in those natural or synthetic نحكي analogs or sorry antagonists or synthetic analogs للsomatostatin, there is a change of the amino acids that would prevent their degradation or metabolism. So this would create a longer half-life for those agents. Those are used for management of acromegaly, حكينا عنها, carcinoid gastrinoma or gastric cancers that release gastrin, and glucagonoma, which is a tumor that releases glucagon, and endocrine tumors. في عندنا group of tumors called MEN or multiple endocrine neoplasias, which release hormones, and those they cause some effects. Now في عندنا some other cancers زي سرطان الرئتين اللي هو small cell lung cancer. خلايا السرطان الرئتين could also release hormones. Okay, هاي بسموه paraneoplastic syndrome. ممكن نحكي عنه later on. Now, octreotide and lanreotide, which are commonly prescribed, they could cause some side effects. They could lead to significant gastrointestinal disturbances because they affect many GI hormones. أكيد زي ما إحنا قلنا. They could cause gallstones اللي هو حصوات بالمرارة, and they could lead to cardiac conduction defects or abnormalities. Now, growth hormone antagonists also could include D2 receptor agonists. Okay. Now, D2 receptor agonists in a high dose could inhibit growth hormone, but in medium or moderate doses, الagonist طبعا أنا بحكي, they could also really inhibit the function of prolactin. عشان هيك في يعني females they have excess prolactin, they lactate, but they are not like in يعني they don't have babies, so this is called يعني prolactin hyperprolactinemia. This is treated by D2 receptor agonists. أكيد you know D2 receptor agonists when you studied Parkinson, so those are يعني anti-Parkinsonian agents like bromocriptine or its analogs. Now another antagonist is called pegvisomant. زي ما قلنا, the steps for the cytokine receptor to be activated is the growth hormone binds to the cytokine receptor, one subunit, and then this attracts a second subunit to bind to the يعني ligand, the first subunit of the receptor, and then two JAKs become next to each other, and then this signaling event starts. So in pegvisomant, the side that attracts the second subunit has a change in it that doesn't attract a second subunit. So pegvisomant's mechanism of action, it doesn't lead to dimerization of the receptor and no effect happens. Okay. Now we have also a group of agents that are related to the sex hormones. في عندنا شيء اسمه follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now يمكن انه when we study about gonadotropin hormones نفهم اكثر about them, but ممكن اشرح لكم شوي عنها. هلا during the menstrual cycle, day 0, when the female sheds her uterus, there are some hormonal changes that occur in the ovary. The ovary starts to produce estrogen that would lead to formation of a new uterus. And the ovary responds to something called the FSH. So the FSH, in fact, travels from the anterior pituitary to the ovary and stimulates follicle growth. الفوليكل اللي هي جواها بيكون في بويضة أو الأوفا. So follicle stimulating hormone keeps really being stimulated. The average female at day 12 or day 14 اللي هو يوم الإباضة أو الاوفيوليشن تايم بصير في ريليس لايجنت اسمه اللوتينايزنج هرمون او هرمون الاباضه. So luteinizing hormone spike would lead to rupture of the follicle and release of the ovary. Now طبعا زي ما قلنا انه اول شيء لما الفوليكل it's growing, estrogen is released in excess and this leads to formation of a new uterine lining. But later on when luteinizing happens او الاباضه بتصير الاوفا بيطلع من الفوليكل والمكان الفوليكل بصير شيء اسمه الجسم الاصفر او الكوربس لوتيوم. Corpus luteum starts production of progestin. Progestin, this leads to vascularization of the uterus to accept a fertilized ova. If an ova didn't fertilize, implantation of a zygote didn't happen in the uterus, so the sources of estrogen and progestin in the body, which is يعني بعد الفترة هاي بصير الامبلانتيشن أو وجود الزيجوت باليوترس stimulates the release of estrogen and progestin from the implanted zygote, okay, and the uterus maintains its own durability by local effect. الاستروجين بصير ينفرز من هناك. But implantation, if it didn't happen, estrogen and progestin sources are lost, and then shedding of the uterus happens, which is called the menstrual cycle. Now, as you can see from the name, follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the follicle growth. And luteinizing hormone kicks in on day 12, which is the average مثلا day of luteinization أو الإباضة, which is responsible for the rupture of the follicle and release of the ovum. Okay? Now, sometimes راح تشوفوا إنه لما تشتغلوا بالصيدليات إنه في people بيحاولوا ينجبوا بس يكون في عندهم مشكلة. So there would be a problem with FSH and LH coordination, and you could mimic that by external hormonal administration. في عندنا FSH analogs و LH analogs. You could start a programmed ovulation مثلا program, and then either you leave اللي هو إنه giving birth إنه by natural ways, or you could collect the ova as soon as it emerges from the ovary, and you can do شيء اسمه IVF اللي هو in vitro fertilization أو تلقيح صناعي أو أطفال الأنابيب بسموها. في عندنا بالملك المؤسس بالطابق 12 I think إذا بتعرفوا في وحدة IVF. مر عليكم شيء زي هيك أطفال أنابيب حد انولد هيك لأنه يعني أنتوا صغار كثير صراحة. You can see إنه FSH and LH are available pharmacologically too. Now, as the name implies, FSH and LH من اسمهم, they are only found in females, but still they are found in males. يعني زي ما بتقولوا إنه they were discovered in females, they were named according to their function in females, but they are available in males. They are responsible for spermatogenesis, formation of sperms in males, and also formation of testosterone, which is the male sex hormone. Now زي ما قلنا في عنا programs for ovulation induction. مثلا protocols, they could be used. They are complex. They are composed of many components to control the ovulation. يصير pharmacologically induced. يعني شو معناها؟ يعني naturally زي ما قلت لكم انه بيوم 12 الاوفيوليشن بيصير, but this is not the case. في ستات بيكون السايكل تاعتهم مش 30 يوم او 28 يوم, ممكن تصير اطول او اقصر. طبعا يعني for you يعني ممكن تشوف انه في programs كثيره مثلا او ويب سايتس ovulation calculator مثلا, ممكن تدور على ovulation calculators. اوكي, هاي الاوفيوليشن كالكوليتر ببساطه you enter your last menstrual cycles. كل ما زاد عدد المنسترول سايكلز اللي بتتذكر متى صارت المنسترويشن اللي هو day 0 day of bleeding, كل ما زاد الريبورت of menstrual cycles بيعطيك exactly when is the day of ovulation يعني for your current cycle. اوكي, فيعني في programs كثيره مثلا او calculators for ovulation. والاوفيوليشن sometimes ما بيكون بيوم 12. وزي ما قلنا احنا ممكن we can collect الاوفا من الاوفري دايركتلي عشان نعمل شيء اسمه الاي في اف او اطفال الانابيب. Now for that reason ممكن يحطوا gonadotropin releasing hormone antagonists جزء من يعني pharmacologically suppress الاوفيوليشن لحد ما احنا بدنا اياه. We withdraw the drug responsible for the ovulation suppression بصير الاوفيوليشن. So those are يعني complex programs. يعني كل دكتور ممكن يعتمد على program من ادويه مختلفه. اوكي. هلا طبعا في some complications. External stimulation of ovulation يعني بالعاده انه normal levels of FSH او LH بيعمل ovulation or stimulation ل one follicle or one ovary, okay, to produce one ova, okay. But in case of those programs اللي انا بحكي لكم عنها ممكن يصير في stimulation ل multiple follicles بالاوفا، ممكن يصير stimulation ل multiple ovaries. يعني بالعاده one ovary is responsible for the activity يعني per cycle. السايكل اللي بعديه ممكن الاوفري نفسه يستلم او another ovary يستلم، اوكي، او يصير active. اوكي. For that multiple ovaries are stimulated or multiple follicles are stimulated, multiple ovaries are stimulated or released, multiple fertilization happen, multiple pregnancies. يعني ممكن يكون في اكثر من بيبي ينولد in that situation. يعني واحد بتكون محرومه من الخلف 12 سنه تعمل هاي الاشياء بيجوها 4 مره واحده هيك. So this also could result using hormones from external sources could stimulate the ovaries and produce certain like effects. صباح الخير صحيتي. Could lead to something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And the ovaries in that situation could release excess of estrogen. Now قلنا انه الاستروجين المين فانكشن بتاعته is hormonal or sex hormone related. But راح تشوف انه this is common between all other steroids انه they could function يعني as glucocorticoids or mineralocorticoids. So excess of مثلا estrogen could lead to fluid retention. وهي طبعا اللي بصير بالحوامل لما يصير معهم الضغط هاي الكلامسيا or preeclampsia. Excess estrogen could lead to hypertension. ممكن في ناس يعني بيحكوا الإكلامسيا is related لأنه البيبي is pressing on the blood vessels going to the legs and this يعني إنه traps يعني blood in upper extremities or this leads or creates a hypertensive status or eclampsia اللي هو تسمم بالحمل بيسموه صح؟ تسمم بالحمل. طبعا يعني بس she has to manage يعني انه يعني طلعوا سكر الحمل غير عن الضغط بتاع الحمل. سكر الحمل ممكن يؤدي الى سكري بيرمننت يعني انه بعد ما تخلف المدام يعني انه يصير معها سكري. I think this is reported like around 50 or 70%. 50 to 70% of females اللي بيصير معهم سكري الحمل بيصير معهم سكري دم. اوكي. فعشان هيك لازم تحافظ على good يعني eating habits during اللي هو البريجننسي. يعني هاي المين ادفايس اللي هو يعني لازم الفيميل يعني ينصحوها فيها. هلا زي ما قلنا انه في خطوات للاوفيوليشن induction. It is programmed, stimulates follicle stimulation, but also suppress اللي هو natural ovulation due to natural LH. وبس luteinization is desired, you withdraw luteinization inhibitor and then ovulation happens and then you collect the ova or leave يعني انه يعني they depend on natural or normal copulation. خلينا نوقف لهون، شو رايكم؟ في اي سؤال عندكم؟ الموضوع يمكن ممل ولا كيف؟ ها بدك محاضره تفاعليه؟ والله يعني منى عيني، بس يعني خلص المحاضره الجاي بيكون تفاعلي ان شاء الله. اوكي، راح اسالكم اسئله وراح نحط يعني علامات عليها. اوكي، في حد عنده اي سؤال بالبيوت؟
دكتور
تفضلي.
في السلايد تبع الجاك والستات
اها
وحكيت انه هلا سؤالي انا انه السوكس هو
شوي
انديوسر
ممكن تقعدوا،
ولا هو
ممكن تقعدوا
inhibitor؟
شوي، ممكن تسكتوا، ممكن تسكتوا. انتوا سامعين ولا لا اول شيء؟ طيب اتفضلي. الو
دكتور
تفضلي.
يس سوري فصل النت، بس بدي اسال في الجاك والستات هلا السوكس هو انديوسر ولا انهبيتور؟
لا زي ما اسمه بيحكي انه هو silencer of cytokine signaling. هو it suppresses الستات dimerization والترانسلوكيشن to the nucleus. فهو
يعني
inhibitor.
انا لو
شوفي دائما ان
يس
فارماكولوجي اي سهم
يس
زي ما انت شايفه السهم مش انه سهم برأس، سهم يعني انه زي مقطوش، هذا بيكون inhibitor.
يس
اي سهم بيكون
طيب
like that بيكون stimulator. اي سهم هيك بيكون inhibition.
تمام. طيب دكتور هلا انا لو بدي اعمل انهبيشن لهاي البروسيس كلها سوكس بس هو
لا
يعني الطريقه؟
قلنا انه في عندنا ناتشورال جاك انهبيتور. في دواء اسمه توفاسيتينب، ماشي؟ توفاسيتينب بيعمل انهبيشن للجاك. جاك اذا تايروسين كاينيز، يعني بده اي تي بي بيعمل فوسفوريليشن سبستريتس. فالجاك التوفاسيتينب بيرتبط بالاي تي بي بايندينج سايت تاعه بيعملوا انهبيشن. اذا في عندنا جاك انهبيتورز. اوكي
يس تمام، شكرا كثير دكتور.
هلا في اي سؤال عندكم؟ يلا تفضلوا، يعطيكم العافيه.